personality in British pop culture, and he was widely beloved. And it turns out he's this terrible sex offender and pedophile and all this other stuff. And he used to apparently just tell people, he would suggest that he was doing terrible things to people, and he would do it in a joking way, and nobody took him seriously. But he's actually telling the truth about what he was doing.
Seville went way beyond anything that, I mean, that at least that I've been informed of, because it would have been bad enough had he been simply a child molester, but he was the kind of predator. Like, this guy had the keys to hospital wards where children were, like, you know, lying and convalescing, and he would go in there and, like, do horrible things to these children. And there were, like, hundreds and hundreds of people that he victimized.
And he was one of Margaret Thatcher's confidants at the time, and a confidant, I think, of the royal family.
That's horrible.
Yeah, that was very sobering, that documentary.
He's kind of like their Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that were talking about Seville over the years. It was kind of like, you know, Michael Jackson. Like, people knew, and they were saying things, but, like, no one would ever take them seriously because he was this beloved figure, and they're like, oh, how could you ever say something like that about him? And it turned out that eventually these people, Johnny Rotten was one of the people that said that Peter Seville was a dirty old man in a colorful way.
Sex Pistols, right?
Yes, Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols, and he said it in his own colorful way, but that was his message. So people knew. I mean, there had to have been people that knew, and yet kept it hush hush.
Well, it's interesting because I was observing this to somebody last night. It's, you know, what Michael Jackson's music has not suffered. It's still, you know, his estate hasn't suffered from this even this film that came out where two of his victims came forward and discussed in gory detail what he did to them. Everybody's, you know, he still gets lots of radio airplay. I'm sure that his music makes lots of money. It's like, it doesn't matter. But what's strange is that Bill Cosby's stuff, you know, Bill Cosby at one point was just as beloved, if not more beloved, than Michael Jackson. But I don't think that, you know, I think that the stain of his alleged crimes has, you know, sort of ruined his content. But it's not the same with Michael Jackson. And I find that to be an interesting comparison, because they were both highly beloved figures that everybody wanted to have nothing but the warmest, fuzziest feelings about.
It really is very similar. I've thought that very thing myself. And it's only because Michael Jackson never, like, the exposure of what he did was not equivalent to Bill Cosby's exposure. Like, there was still, Michael Jackson had a better smoke screen around him, and you know, he was incredibly rich. I'm sure he was way more rich than Bill Cosby. So, you know, he was a little more intimidating probably to people that had firsthand knowledge of what was going on. There were people that spoke up, but, you know, there were just as many people that were saying, oh, it's nonsense, it's all made up. So, really? It was all made up?
And that's one of the things, that's a good example of something that I find really scary in the real world, that in my opinion dwarfs what I write about. I mean, people's capacity to look at clear evidence of terrible, terrible things and just ignore it and behave as if it doesn't exist. There's this wonderful scene in that movie that Leonardo DiCaprio made. I think it was like 1998 or 9. What was it called? The Beach, where he's in Phuket, and he's with all of these sort of Western drifters who are living this, you know, fake paradise on the beach in Phuket, and they sleep under the stars, and they eat coconuts, and they play volleyball and eat fish. And apparently one of their crew is mortally wounded trying to fish for them or something, gets bitten by a shark, and they drag him out of the surf, and they can't help him, so they leave him nearby to die. And while he's dying, they're playing volleyball, you know. And it's an extraordinarily compelling image.
Jim, I'm really glad you brought up Salem's Lot, because that actually is one of my favorite horror books from when I was a kid. That was probably one of the first novels that I ever read that was sort of like an adult novel. Because I was reading, like, I would get scary books from the Scholastic. Like, they would come to your school, and like you could first you'd get a catalog, and you'd order all these books out of it, and you brought in your check for the teacher.
Right.
And then like a couple months later, like so long that you forgot about the books in the first place. One day you'd go into school and the teacher would be like, guess what? The Scholastic shipment came in, and then you'd have books. And this was one of them. I actually got it out and got it ready. It was called Monster Madness.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
That's cool.
And this is actually, despite Bela Lugosi being on the cover, it's actually a bunch of short stories inside of it. But the short stories that are in it are like, there's stuff that you don't normally see scary stories about. Like, there was one called The Slime Mold Monster is Coming. And it had this little girl who woke up one day and there was this mess in the sink, and it ate the plunger. And she was trying to get rid of it, and it starts growing like the Blob. So that was interesting. That was a Scholastic book. But Salem's Lot really blew my mind. I'd seen the TV movie first, and it scared me so bad. But the book, I wanted to read or no, wait, I got that backwards, because one of the adults in my life who did like to talk to me about horror novels and horror fiction was my stepmother. Her name's Bunny. And she was a Stephen King fan from the get-go, like from Carrie. And she talked about Stephen King all the time. She told me about Salem's Lot and how it was this book about vampires, which were my favorite monster. So I conned somebody into getting me the novel Salem's Lot, and I was reading it. And then I came to this one part, and I said to my mom, I was like, hey, Mom, what's a transvestite? And she took the book off of me, and I never got it back. I had to finish reading it a little later in life. But it's such a great book, and the TV movie is very different. If there's anybody out there who has never read Salem's Lot, that should be your go-to Stephen King book, in my opinion.
I had a similar experience with maybe age inappropriate literature and my mom. I wasn't allowed to watch all these R-rated horror movies, but my parents let me buy these fanzines about them. And so I read all these fanzines about like Halloween 2 and Friday the 13th Part 3 and what Terror Train, all these all these awesome slasher movies. And I remember there was a line in one of the stories out, one of the films. It might have been Halloween 2, I'm not sure, but it was "It'll curdle your girdle, Myrtle," right? and I think I repeated that line, and my mother heard me, and she's like, "How do you know what a girdle is?"
That's sensitive.
That's funny.
And I was probably 10 years old, so I didn't know what a girdle was. I just liked the rhyme. So,
well, I just want to jump in here for a second and just say, I think our audio is on YouTube. For whatever reason, I apologize again. I thought I paid Restream and it would work. But anyways, talking about books like Stephen King books, I read this one in high school, Pet Cemetery. I'm pretty sure I read it after I saw the movie. I may have read it beforehand, but this book scared the crap out of me, particularly the scene where they were talking about the wife's sister that had spinal meningitis, and that whole, I think it was Zelda was her name. That whole
yes.
scene in the book scared the crap out of me. And this is the original hardcover that I have here. And then talking about the Scholastic books that Bill mentioned, I just wanted to bring up what I have is I've got this awesome one called Movie Monsters.
Wow. I had that one too.
Yeah, it's great. It's got some great pictures in it.
What happened to that?
I don't know. I got some good ones here. I think that's Frederick March and stuff. And then one last one. I mean, I have tons and tons of books from my childhood, but this one here, that last one was called Movie Monsters. This one's called Monsters from the Movies. And it's actually a thicker book. I don't know where I got it from. I don't think it was from Scholastic Books, But this is another one that just sort of got me through childhood. Yeah, I just opened up to the Invisible Man and all kinds of great stuff. So yeah, I mean, there was so much more. Oh, and one last one. I have a funny story about this one, of course. Jay Anson's The Amityville Horror, which, by the way, my grandmother, my nana, read this book. This is the very book that she read, and she had to go to bed every night with a pair of rosary beads because she was terrified of what she was reading, but she couldn't put the book down.
That was
Well, that's the
that
best
was on
kind of book.
Yeah.
that was on everybody's nightstand in the 70s, the Amityville Horror.
Oh yeah, yeah. And my parents always took me to rated R movies. I think I told this on this show, if not on Then Is Now. My first movie was Asylum in 1972, the anthology Amicus film with Peter Cushing. And I have vivid memories of that movie. In fact, my mother and I for years forgot the name. We called it Chopping Heads. But I always got to see, kids in the playground. I was thinking of this today. Kids in the playground would be like, "There's no way you saw that movie, whatever movie it was. It's rated R." I'm like, "Well, my parents took me to see it. My mother covered my eyes to the sex scenes because in our house, sex bad, violence good,
Like a normal house.
Right, exactly.
You'll appreciate this. I had a similar experience when I was, I don't know, I was probably 13, no, 14. Um, I was renting horror movies, and my parents just rented them. They didn't care, and some of them were like, really, really out there. And so for the first, I saw Lucio Fulci's Zombie.
Mm.
Okay, and I hadn't even watched it. My brother brought it across the street to our friend's house, and I was doing homework. I was like, I don't know, eighth grade. And so I finished the homework and I go across the street to catch up with everybody. And so my brother, my friends, and their parents are watching this movie. And I don't know, at some point, like maybe it's like when I don't know if it's before or after the scene where the woman's eye gets sliced through by the
Prince's
splinter.
mother from Purple Rain.
Yeah, or like the scene where some woman's walking around topless wearing nothing but body paint. I don't know. It's you know
No, that's Night of the
at some
Zombies.
yeah, at some point the father of my friend looks at me and he says, take that out, and he says, you're never allowed in this house again. And I hadn't even watched the movie. I didn't even know it was in it.
I
Oh my
was
God.
that kid, banned from everybody's home.
That's hilarious. I remember recommending Reanimator to my aunt and uncle, and they were all mortified after they watched it.
Ah, that's too bad. I
I
think if
know.
anybody, if any movie can make that kind of over the top gore acceptable, it's Reanimator. But then they had to put in like the part about the severed head
Right.
and going down on that woman, and then I was like, oh well, maybe that is too far. The last time I saw it, it was just at the drive-in a couple of months or in April with
Oh,
the
that's
with the
right. Yep.
drive-in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
but
funny because that was an interesting year when Reanimator came out. Was it 86, I think?
85.
85. Yeah,
Because
because
my favorite, it and my other favorite horror movie, Return of the Living Dead, came out the same year, 85.
okay, because I remember, and I know I've told the story before, but I begged my parents to take me to see Reanimator, but it was NC-17 around the time of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer that created this whole thing because they got an X rating based on the mood of the film. So Reanimator got an X rating, which or was actually NC-17, which meant no one under 17. So I convinced my dad to go buy the tickets while my mom and I went over in the corner of the theater lobby, and then he went and bought them and came over to us. We saw that. Then we saw Texas Chainsaw 2 shortly thereafter. I forget exactly the timeline.
Also NC-17.
yeah.
Yes, same thing. He bought the tickets. We went and saw it, except at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, when Leatherface is chasing the girl and he's slicing her legs with his straight razor, my father leans across my mother at the end of the movie to me and goes, "We are never seeing another movie like this again."
Well, it was fun while it lasted, I guess.
Yeah, and then that point, at 18, I could drive and had a car, so I just went and saw them myself.
Yeah, it's funny. The yuppie execution scene at the beginning of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is clearly the best part of that movie. That and I'm sorry, and when Bill Moseley shows up at the radio station.
That's
Yes.
probably what I would call the best part of that whole movie. That whole scene is just genius.
I think it's funny because I think Bill Moseley went to this elite prep school in Connecticut called the Hotchkiss School. I went to a boarding school too, and they were a rival. And it's super preppy, super buttoned down, and sort of the finishing school of the establishment. And then he went to Yale, and it's funny because you see this guy with he's obviously brilliant and with these world class credentials, and he's playing the guy. What do they call him with the plate
Top.
in his head? Yeah, exactly. And it's just I love that because I identify with that. This coming from this really buttoned down, not repressive, but very conventional sort of background, and being into horror. And I'm good at. I used to be a lawyer, so I'm good at sort of projecting a kind of humdrum. Yeah, let's do this reliable, dependable persona, which you have to do when you're a lawyer or in other situations. But sometimes I'll just make a comment and the mask slips away.
Yeah, that scene works so well. That whole film, because of the acting. Like people don't talk about how good the acting is in horror movies a lot, because at least they didn't when these films were current. People talk about it all the time now, but that was unheard of back in the 80s when horror was still very disreputable, and you just didn't see a horror movie winning best movie at the Academy or anything. That didn't happen really, I guess, until Silence of the Lambs. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, it was disreputable, and you just didn't do it. But the acting is so good. Like the actors in Bill Moseley, and I'm not going to be able to remember Stretch's real name now. The actress who plays Stretch, they're so good. They really sell that crazy scene, and that's what you need in a film like that. It either works or it doesn't, and for me, that worked.
Well, I think that Bill Moseley is such a great actor that you almost get a sense of genuine menace from him.
Yes. No matter what he says.
Leatherface, you bitch! You ruined my Sonny Bono wig.
What about my request?
What did you think of the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie?
I didn't see
it.
Really? All right, I won't spoil it for you, but there is this magnificent scene where Leatherface wipes out a whole busload of partying 20-somethings. And it is epic on the level of Guernica. The Pablo Picasso film, not film, master painting, his reaction to the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. You've probably seen Guernica and not realized it, maybe, but it's a symphony of calculated violence. So,
wait, is that the one I saw
it.
a post recently where someone posted a poster of it where it says Quentin Tarantino presents, and then I thought it was that maybe.
No, this is the Netflix one that just came out this year.
No, I didn't see it.
So yeah, it's worth a watch.
Interesting. So, Jim, aside from, like, let's say, novels, like the kind of books you've written, some of the books that Bill and I have showed that we grew up with, what other kind of horror books are out there that you think people should know about? Are there any?
I'm trying to think. You know what I like I like horror nostalgia stuff and artists who are kind of on the periphery of horror or use standard horror tropes in a kind of camp way. I'm thinking of Christopher Cooper, The Art of Coop. And there was a huge the camp horror stuff from the 60s, like the Munsters and the Addams Family, all of Charles Addams stuff, Edward Gorey. There is a one of the things I love about horror is that there are so many compelling manifestations of it, especially when you get into comedy, and you can get to a point where you're like Edward Gorey and you don't actually see anything really horrible happen, but what's implied is both terrifying and hilarious. I'm thinking of the Gashly Crumb Tinies,
Yeah,
you know,
that's my go-to Edward Gorey.
and Charles Adams is great too. And the recently deceased Gahan Wilson, is that how you pronounce it? Gahan?
Yeah,
He
I
was
think
a
so. Yeah.
he was a morbid cartoonist for Playboy forever. You know, and I remember I took this, there was this cartoon, I loved it so much, I hung it on my wall in college, and it shows this criminal defendant before this judge on the bench, and there are two flags flanking the bench. One's the American flag, and one is the Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones.
Yeah.
And the judge says, the other one is my personal flag. You know, you know, I the that and the what is it, retro go-go. There was this whole culture of kind of pop horror, mod horror that grew up in the 60s. Who's the drag racing monster? You could build model kits of the drag racing monster. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Christopher Cooper does homages to that.
Well, there was the Munsters
Um,
car, the Munsters coach, or the Dragula.
no, I'm talking about that too, but there was a whole series of model kits that were based on some
Yeah,
creature that likes to drive these monster-like
it was a
cars. And
model thing. I never really got into models, but I would see
but
them advertised.
the aesthetics of that to me are really cool because it was kind of like the monster mashization of horror, right? Where it becomes camp and amusing and um in many ways more sophisticated, right? So it becomes it in that way it becomes not domesticated necessarily, but more acceptable to the average palate because it's artistically compelling. So, and then, Night of Living Dead hits, and it's like so nihilistic. It inaugurates, that's like the inflection point for me of the movement away from campy horror to, you know, just absolutely nihilistic, terrifying horror, things like Bloodsucking Freaks.
Yeah.
So, but
That
that's what I recommend. I recommend people look at Gahan Wilson, Edward Gorey, Charles Adams, that kind of stuff, because I'm not a huge reader of horror fiction. And I honestly, outside of comics, I never have been. I just, maybe it's because I have a stunted attention span. Maybe I watched too much television as a child. I don't read a lot of fiction per se. I mean, and I was an English literature major, so I don't know how that happened, but you know, I prefer visual media and or you know terse storytelling like radio shows or anthologies. And so that's what I recommend to people, like old time radio,
yeah.
Inner Sanctum Mysteries, suspense, Arch Oboler's radio plays. That stuff is really great.
Hmm.
And I highly recommend it to people. And it's had a renaissance since the emergence of the iPod, the portable music player. Ever since it's been synced to the internet, I think almost all of these old radio shows are in the public domain now, so you can listen to them for free. And there's some of the I suggested for this episode we might talk about Lucille Fletcher because she's one of the best horror authors of the 20th century, and she just wrote this stuff that I listened to it as a kid, and it left a mark, and it is just so terrifying. And because it's not visual, because it's just audio, if you have a really good imagination, it weaponizes your imagination against yourself, which is sort of the best kind of horror,
Right.
in my opinion.
Right. Hey, Bill, real quick, did you want to mention some of the comments that we have on Facebook right now?
I didn't see any.
Okay, we've got a couple from Beth Waldron. Um, and I apologize. This one was from 20 minutes ago. She said John Lydon. I'm not sure how that applied to
That's
what.
Johnny Rotten. That's his real name.
Oh, okay.
John Lydon.
Okay. And then she mentions Ed Big Daddy Roth did the drag racing monster.
Yes.
Rat
Yes.
Fink. Was that
Yes.
Rat Fink a
Yes,
boo
that's
boo?
what
Or is that different?
I don't know if that's I know it's Rat Fink
Okay.
and Big Daddy yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, this kind of popularization of horror, but it's still readily identifiable as something. It's not a knockoff of anything. It's like a meaningful reimagining of a horror concept.
Right,
Oh, I
right.
found the comments. Sorry, Beth.
No problem.
I was looking. I don't know what happened
I
there.
find that I have to refresh every so often, and then they pop up.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. I know Beth said she was going to hang out, and Sean was watching earlier, Sean Midas. So
Awesome.
thanks, guys, for hanging out with us.
Oh, yes, thank you so much. We appreciate it. So, Bill, in your opinion, other
Yes.
books beyond the ones that we've talked about that maybe people might be interested in or may have been interested in the past?
Well, I mean, we talked about all the obvious people, Stephen King. How about I would recommend Richard Matheson. Like
Yeah, I
anything by Richard
I
Matheson
Am
is just
Legend. Yeah,
stellar. Yeah, I Am Legend is a great place to start.
Legend of Hell House.
If you
Yeah,
haven't read actually read I Am Legend, you really should, because you're doing yourself a great disservice. I know we've all seen movies based on it, and we think we know the story. It's not quite the way it's been depicted in films in the story. So check it out. Anything by Richard Matheson, though, you can't go wrong.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I recommend Michael J. Weldon's books if you can find them. I think they're on Amazon. They might be a little pricey, but like the what is this one? Hold on, it's on my bookshelf here. The Psychotronic Video Guide is one of them. He basically painstakingly over years in his magazine, the Psychotronic, was it Psychotronic Video Magazine, or I think it was just called Psychotronic. Oh, actually, I might have one right here. Hold on. Oh yeah, it was just called Psychotronic.
Yeah.
yes.
And he wrote a couple of books which kind of compiled all his reviews. He painstakingly reviewed like thousands of films, and also the books of an author named Troy Howarth, who I'm trying to get on the show. But for God's sakes, I got to read his books, and they're like 900 pages long. But he's done a couple of books on like Mario Bava and Dario Argento and all of these great
He does a lot
Italian
of
directors.
commentary tracks too.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So he's an awesome author, and I'm still reading your books if you're listening. So but yeah, there's so many books like about movies, about the horror filmmaking. In fact, I think he did a book on John Carpenter too, which I have. So I have books on Hammer films. I think it's one called Night Flyers, which is about the Hammer Film Company. And if you don't want to read fiction and you want to read how these movies got created, there's a whole other genre. I mean, these books like this one I just showed you earlier, the movie Monsters, doesn't really talk about how they were created, but they tell you the stories, and these are especially good for reading to a young person in your life, where you can tell them about all these great movies that we grew up with. Bill and
Speaking of that,
yeah.
our 5-year-old granddaughter was just visiting with us a couple of weeks ago,
Oh, nice.
and I watched the 1931 Dracula, um,
Oh, cool.
one of the Frankenstein movies, and Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the Creature Walks Among Us. Then we watched all those movies together, and she was like enraptured by these films. I knew she was mature enough to handle monsters. She loved Scooby Doo, like when she was a little
Nice.
bit younger. So I knew she was up for it. But one of the first things she said to me, she said, "Grandfather, why is the screen all black?" And I was like, well, I had explained to her what a black and white movie was, but she accepted it and she went with it. And she especially liked the Creature. She kept saying, she's the one he's going to pull under the water, isn't she? And I said, yes, he does. You must have seen this before. When we watched the second one, I was like, okay, which one is the Creature going to pull under the water? And she's like, the girl.
That's awesome. Yeah, my grandson is 5 also. He lives with us, and he's watched all those movies, and he loves the Wolfman and the Gill Man and all that stuff. And It's funny because he doesn't even bat an eyelash when it's black and white. I'll be watching something that's maybe not horror related, but like, so I've been catching up with some of the Santo movies for some of our future things, and he'll come in and sit down and watch with me and never questions the black and white because he's grown up with it. And I just want to take a side note here to tell folks at home that's something that I've talked about on Then Is Now podcast is you've got to get these kids when they're young, introduce them to black and white movies, and if they ask, explain to them
Yeah.
why it's black and white. The directors were able to play with the shadows. It was cheaper,
Yeah.
cheaper film stock. They didn't have color up till a certain point. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and I think the kids today, they don't understand, especially the older kids. They're like, "Oh, why is that black and white?" Or like you said, "Why is
Well,
that black?" It's like,
I like to say, I like to think that you can't really do film noir in color,
right,
right? I mean, there's some things that you lose in color. Black and white is in some ways it's a much richer palette because it compels you to think about what you're doing more. It doesn't do your thinking for you by being entirely representational.
right. Right, exactly. We have another comment on Beth Beth Waldron just said it's okay. I think probably because I said we took so long to get to her post. So I want to kind of
Thanks,
switch
Beth.
gears here and move on. We've talked about books, and now we started talking about movies there just for a little bit, and let's get into a couple of films. On our plate today, we're going to talk about Terror Train from 1980 and My Bloody Valentine from 81. So let's start with Terror Train, and I'm going to read the synopsis first, and we'll go from there. um, 3 years after a prank went terribly awry, the six college students responsible are targeted by a masked killer at a New Year's Eve party aboard a moving train. So, this film is directed by Roger Spottiswoode, who he did a lot of high-profile films, including 48 Hours, Shoot to Kill, The Sixth Day, the James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, and the real high-profile film Turner and Hooch with Tom Hanks. Written by T.Y. Drake and Daniel Grodnick and Judith Rasco, who've all done like a horror movie or two. But the big thing is this cast. You've got Jamie Lee Curtis, who played Alana Maxwell. Ben Johnson played Karen, the train conductor. But the one that stuck out to me when I watched this, actually, Bill, you went to the Riverside Drive-In for the April Ghouls Drive-In Monsterama this past April, and I wasn't able to make it, so I watched some of the movies, and this was one of them. I didn't realize until I watched it at that point in April that Hart Bachner was in it. He plays Doc, quote unquote,
Yeah.
Doc Manley, and I was shocked when I saw his name in in the credits because I recognized him as Ellis from Die Hard, who is the prick that tries to negotiate with the terrorists and ends up getting his head blown off.
That's him.
Yeah,
Oh my god,
yeah,
He loses
that's
his head
right.
in Terror Train too.
isn't that what we're talking about?
Yeah, but he loses his head in both movies.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
His head literally gets cut off.
That's right. And of course, we have David Copperfield as quote unquote the magician. That's his only name in the movie. I saw this one in the drive-in as a kid, and I rewatched it recently, obviously for reasons I just explained. But Bill, what did you think of in terms of seeing this on the big screen? Was it again? Had you seen it originally on the big screen?
I never saw it big screen before, and I was especially excited about it because it was actually shot inside of a real train, unlike many movies about a train, which is just a set. This was a real train, and it was John Alcott did the cinematography on this film, and I heard him talk about it somewhere, probably on one of the supplements on the Blu-ray or something. It was about how challenging it was to light the interior of this train because it's such a limited space, and a lighting rig is huge, so you have to figure out ways to get the lighting in without exposing it. I think it looks fabulous, especially on a big screen. It's a very claustrophobic film.
Yeah,
And
claustrophobic.
you lose that aspect when you're seeing it on a claustrophobic screen. Being confronted with that large size was it was a very different experience. I'm glad I got to see it that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw that in the movies as a kid. I can't remember if my parents took me to the drive-in or in the theater. I'm pretty sure it was the drive-in to see that one. But Jim, what about you? When did you first see Terror Train?
I don't remember exactly. It was one of those films I really wanted to see as a kid because it was in that because I like Jamie Lee Curtis. She was in Halloween 2 and Prom Night, and she was in this, Terror Train that I couldn't see. I got to read about it in the magazine. But at some point I got to watch it, and I still think my favorite scene is the prank they pull on that kid, Kenny Hampton or Hampton at the
Yeah.
beginning. That is such a depraved, let's put it this way. I'm a member of a fraternity, and I've seen, fraternity, when you get a bunch of people together who have too much time on their hands and are drinking, you can come up with some pretty insane stuff. And I was thinking, wow, this is just definitely out there, even for a fraternity prank.
That went beyond a prank. That was psychotic what they did.
Yeah, it
That's
was
what's
really mean.
interesting about that movie to me is normally we were used to seeing Jamie Lee Curtis as the virginal sort of like Laurie Strode. She was naive, maybe a little naive and insecure, and she was not. Alana is a totally different character, and she's not even blameless. She's one of them. She's one of the people that perpetrated this prank. Although I always disliked that they gave her a little bit of an out. Like she didn't really know what the entirety of what was happening.
Well, she has to be the moral center of the film, and
Yeah.
if she has no redeemability, then it gets really nihilistic really quickly.
Right.
Yeah. I
Now,
thought
go ahead.
it would have been more challenging to her as an actor, I think, to make her vulnerable and accessible, even though she had perpetrated this prank, knowing how damaging it was going to be.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I was just going to
I
say
love
that
this movie.
I didn't remember this. I think I probably only saw it when I saw it in the theater. I may have seen it when it debuted on TV. But I had forgotten, with the exception of the beginning scene, and literally it was the guy that they played the prank on was his reaction. And I don't want to give any spoilers away because I really think people should check this movie out. I think it's on Tubi right now. Am I incorrect?
Well, you can watch it for free, I think, on AMC if you have basic cable.
Oh, okay. I don't
It's on
have that,
Tubi.
but okay, it was on Tubi. All right.
That's right, it's on Tubi.
Yeah. That's where I watched it.
Side
And
note, Tubi is one of the greatest
isn't it?
sources of horror right now.
Oh my
Period.
God. It's
There's
unbelievable.
so much great stuff there, and all these crazy documentaries about horror films, especially the British Video Nasty controversy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
But
Tubi's
anyways,
like my new favorite channel. Go ahead, sorry.
this film, there's a twist at the end, and I don't want to give it away. I think people really should see this.
We can't
I
talk about it
Well, I mean, all right, spoiler alert. Those
for a
listening at home,
30-year-old movie.
if you haven't seen
40,
Terror Train,
40.
yeah, if this is live, but it's being recorded, and I'm gonna have to repost it on YouTube because we're not on YouTube except for audio. But so go away, watch the film, and then find our video and come back and watch it. But anyways, so there's the twist at the end about who the killer is. Now, personally, I'm not going to say who the killer is, but I was watching this with my wife, and about halfway, maybe three-quarters of the way through, I'm looking at the character and looking at the character. I'm like, there's something not right with that person. And I honestly did not remember who the killer was in this movie. And then it dawned on me, and before the reveal, I was like, "Oh shit, that's who that is." And then they revealed it. I didn't say anything out loud, of course. I don't want to ruin it for the wife, but it's really interesting. I mean, you guys can expand on that if you want.
No, I agree. I think it was a stroke of genius. I guess if I had, I don't want to be a spoiler, but
It's all right. Bill's
I
going to
would
be
have
a spoiler.
I'm gonna spoil it. So
all right. Well, I would have wanted to know a little bit more about the kid's interest in magic. I know it's you sort of the you don't the character we're talking about is introduced only briefly at the beginning of the film, so there's not much of an opportunity to flesh out the character and the interest. Those come obliquely. That fleshing out comes obliquely and then suddenly throughout the second act. And but it's implied by the masquerade party and the magic tricks. And I think that the only, and I'm thinking from a constructed in artistic perspective. I just wonder if, no, you know what? I take that back. The deception that Jamie Lee Curtis is the center of, at least thematically, sets up the eventual revelation of who the killer is, in terms of magic
Yeah.
being a form of deception.
He does it to them, which I think is brilliant. Like they lure him into this prank that ends up with him in bed with what he thinks is a woman, Alana, but it turns out
a woman.
Well, sort of, but it's not Alana, and she's also not alive. So they lure him into bed with a corpse, and he's a virgin. So this is his first sort of. He's like this shy
sex
kid,
as death,
and it really just sort of like transforms him, and he has this psychotic breakdown, and through it's a lot of. You're right. It's not very well fleshed out, and honestly, the story was not what these people were going for when they read. This was obviously a very obvious cash in on Halloween, because I'm sure the movie wouldn't have been made if Jamie Lee Curtis had not agreed to do it.
And this was the height of her scream queen career, right?
Well, this was only one of the other slashers she did. She did Prom Night
and The Fog.
They were both
The
Fog also. Not really a slasher, but yet another horror movie. But they all came out around the same time. So I think Terror Train might have been the very next thing she signed on for. I could be wrong about that point. But anyway, I mean, it all happened very quickly, where her Scream Queen career. And then fortunately for her, it was over. And she went on to like really great
Perfect
in her acting
with John
career.
Travolta, right?
Yes, exactly.
True
that
Lies.
Movie might not have been made had she.
And then trading spaces or
places. And then
Jamie Lee Curtis's character in this film is part of this illusion, getting him into bed with this corpse. And at the end of the film, the killer, every person that he kills, it is Kenny Hampson. They know he's on the train, but they don't know who he is, and that's part of the game of it. And there's a red herring and a magician that's there, and they discover that Kenny was interested in magic also. But what they don't know is that Kenny is disguising himself not only as each of the victim, but there's another character. I've said so much. Like, should I really not say it?
It's up to you, man. I mean, if, like you said, the movie's over 40 years old. If people haven't seen it by now,
he turns out to be the assistant to David Copperfield, who presents as a female, as a woman, and not only that,
and as a blonde woman, right?
Yeah. Well, he's wearing like these really sort of like sexy gowns and everything. So this isn't just like somebody in a cheap disguise.
I'm sorry, he's not a blonde. That's
no, he has red hair, I think, in the female character. I don't know, or dark, but
something like dirty blonde or red blonde. Yeah, but he's got black hair. The character himself has black hair, and that's part of the fake out.
But this character to me is very compelling because he was the butt of like these mean kids did something to him. And if you ever had I don't know what your high school experiences were like, but I was the Kenny Hampson character. So it was sort of vindicating to see characters like this getting some sort of sick revenge on these people that had wronged him. And there's a very human element to him that is missing from a lot of those slasher villains, because they do present an actual backstory for him. And at the end, he has this great confrontation with her, where basically he's like he wants to know why she did it, and she keeps apologizing for it. Jamie Lee Curtis is really good in that scene too.
And they finally kiss, and that's what drives him finally mad. I mean, more mad than he was.
Yeah, that's the thing that ends up saving her, is she kisses him, and it makes him relive this psychotic break that he had. It's a really good film.
Reverse Sleeping Beauty.
That actor who portrays this character, Derek McKinnon, is a Canadian actor. He actually was taking a friend of his to the film to audition. He wasn't even going to audition. But Derek was a very well-known drag artist in I think Montreal, and so he already had that aspect of the character down. Like they wanted to hire somebody who could portray this effectively, and that's how he ended up getting the role. And but he had a very interesting connection to this story also, because many years later, he lived in an apartment building, and in the same building as him lived Luca Magnotta, who, if you're a true crime buff, you may remember that he was a Canadian kid who met this guy online and murdered him and dismembered his corpse, and he videotaped it and uploaded it to the internet.
Oh my God.
Like, it was available like to watch for a little while. And or at least there was like some capacity where he shared this video with other people. And Derek McKinnon lived in that same building and knew Luca Magnotta. And Luca was fascinated. He was sort of like a socially upward club kid, Luca. And, you know, he was known as sort of being a hustler, and he was, you know, he had a good body, but he would often change his appearance. And he was obsessed with this movie Terror Train because the killer changes his appearance in it. And
at one point, the killer kills the guy in the lizard suit and then takes his cuts his hand off and then uses it to fondle the guy's girlfriend while he's wearing the dead boyfriend's costume. That is so disturbing.
There were very real similarities between what Luca Magnotta did and Derek McKinnon's performance. Now Derek claims that the night of the murder, they invited him to join them in their apartment, but he said he had something else to do, so he didn't go. And the next day, he saw Luca leaving the apartment. This would have been after the murder, and he was wearing a long red wig. And Derek, of course, you know, being able to recognize when there's a guy in drag, like he was like, oh, that's Luca. But he had changed his appearance, like to avoid detection after this murder.
Huh.
It was very creepy, like the similarities between the two, the real life and the fiction.
So when did this occur? Because you said he uploaded it online. So would this have been like in the late 90s?
No, it was 2012.
2012. So the guy from the film, I'm sorry, I apologize, I forgot his name, but
Derek.
Derek. He was still alive at that point. Is he still alive now?
He's still alive.
Okay.
Sure, yeah. Derek McKinnon's still alive.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, terrible, horrible, but
yeah, it's
I
pretty
wonder if he's
horrific.
in the same prison as Paul Bernardo.
Who's that?
I bet they're friends.
I don't know who that is. Tell us for the audience in case they know.
He's the with Karla Homolka. He's one of the most famous serial killers in Canadian history.
Oh, okay.
He married this woman Homolka, and then basically got her to join him in killing women. And one of their first victims was her sister. And it's very disturbing. And it's a big black hole that you can dive well into if you're a true crime person. But Paul Bernardo is, I think, imprisoned for like multiple life terms or something.
The Ken and Barbie murders.
Yeah, and he's one of the most famous Canadian murderers, period. He's still alive too. So.
Oh my God.
Amusing side note: he wanted to be the next Vanilla Ice.
Oh, geez.
When he had a.
I think the job is available now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a burgeoning rap career, but he had a rap career, or he aspired to have one before he got picked up for multiple homicides. So
interesting. We've got some more comments on the Facebook. Matt writes, "How many decades need to pass before something ceases to be a spoiler? My vote is for 2." What do you guys think of that?
I think that's sensible.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years is long enough that if you haven't seen the film, for God's sakes.
I don't know. I mean, I think that stuff ends up memed almost immediately after it gets distributed to home video. So it's like, I would say within a year of home video distribution, because the best scenes, which are often spoilers, are clipped out and memed and gifed, or gift rather,
I say GIF.
and they're all over social media.
You have to
So
be careful though, because we forget. Like we lived it. We were there the first time these films were around. There's a whole new generation of people that haven't seen these films and they're not aware of them. So, you know, you still run the risk of a spoiler, because what's the first thing anyone's going to do if they're interested in an old movie? They're probably going to look it up online and they're going to find a whole bunch of stuff written there anyway. So
I suppose. I mean, whenever I see it, if there's a film coming out, it's going to come out like say 6 months from now. I'll watch the teaser or the trailer then, and then after that, if I
yeah,
know I want to see the film, I'll go on media blackout. So even if there's stuff afterwards, whatever you want, memes, gifs, whatever, I will avoid them at all costs. And in fact, a good example was my wife and I just watched No Time to Die, the new Bond film, which for whatever reason I didn't get a chance to see in the theater. And I've seen every James Bond film in the theater, I think, since The Spy Who Loved Me or whatever, maybe one or two before that. Might have been The Man with the Golden Gun. But so I enjoyed it completely because I knew virtually nothing about the film. And I just don't understand why people like to look up movies, like you said, Bill, beforehand. And my son's girlfriend does that. She like knows everything about the movie before we see it. It's like, well, then where's the joy in watching the film?
some people just can't wait. I have a friend who described himself. He read, what was it? He read something I had written, and he said I think he said I'm a type A personality, so I just read the conclusion first, you know, because I don't want to wait to get to it. So some people are just impatient, right?
well,
So
you should have sent him the Reader's Digest version.
And that's why they show the ending of the film in trailers, which is another reason why I generally don't like to watch trailers. I will never forget. I was in the theater watching Back to the Future 2, and they filmed 2 and 3 back to back. And at the end of part 2, they had a trailer for part 3, and there's a shot in that trailer that as I'm watching it in the theater with my buddies, and I'm like, that's the end of the movie. Like, why do we need to see the movie now? We know how it ends. They totally gave away the end of the third film at the end of the second movie.
Yeah.
That pissed me off. We get a couple more comments here though on Facebook. We've got Beth chimes in about the murders you guys were talking about. She mentions the Ken and Barbie murders, which you guys mentioned. She says Luca was inspired by Paula Homolka.
yeah,
Yeah, she was another
Carla
Canadian
Homolka.
serial killer.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's the one who murdered her own sister with Paul Bernardo. They drugged her, and then I think they raped her and murdered her.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
it's really dark.
This is why I'm not into true crime and I don't know anything about this because it's even too disturbing for me. Heck, I can't watch the commercials with the starving children in another country.
The abused animals and Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I say yeah. I mean, I actually think that I have a term for stuff like that. I call it morality porn,
Oh
where
god.
it's such an assault upon what are supposed to be your better instincts that
Yeah.
it's almost victimizing. It's so brutal, and it's meant to elicit a kind of visceral reaction, but also guilt if you don't intervene. It's
Yeah.
like you're about to see a toddler go into traffic, and if you don't save the toddler, you're a terrible person. And so that is, that sensation is meant to be implied through the ad, hence morality porn.
And that reminds me of the South Park episode where they spoofed Sally Struthers doing those commercials about the starving children, yet she's eating and getting fatter and fatter by the minute. Beth also says one last comment here that Luca was obsessed with that case, which was the Paula Homolka case. So I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting.
Yeah, that's why I like to say stuff that happens in real life to me is much scarier than the stuff I write, because it's very difficult to look at something like that and I mean, maybe if it happened 500 years ago, if you can have an ironic distance from it, and because no one in living memory has any recollection of it.
Right.
But these people are all still alive, and it's it's an extremely poor taste, to say the least, to like make all kinds of gonzo jokes and that sort of thing about it. So
Right, right. So let's move on to the next film we're going to discuss tonight. It's My Bloody Valentine from 1981, and the synopsis reads: I got these synopses from IMDb, so take it with what you will. Decades old folktale surrounding a deranged murderer killing those who celebrate Valentine's Day turns out to be true. True to legend, as when a group defies the killer's order and people start turning up dead. Now, this one has is directed by George Mihalka, who directed one of the movies I like, Eternal Evil from '85 with Karen Black. It was written by Stephen Miller, who wrote Werewolf of Washington, as well as a bunch of TV shows, and another guy, John Beard. I think that it's Beaird. I assume it's Beard. He's uncredited as to writing the film Happy Birthday to Me, and the film
yeah,
stars Paul Kellman as Tom Jesse TJ Hanniger. He was also in Black Roses, which I remember that film from when I worked in the video store. Laurie Hallier was Sarah Mercer. She did mostly TV shows. Neil Affleck, who I don't believe is any relation to Ben, he played Axel Palmer. He was in Scanners, and he did a lot of animation, and most notably, he did animation on the Simpsons movie. And lastly, I wanted to mention Peter Cowper, who plays Harry Warden slash the Miner. He's actually producing a movie called Valentine Bluffs, which is a direct sequel to this film, and it's being directed by none other than Lloyd Kaufman, who also plays the mayor in it.
wow, that's awesome.
So it's got to be good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So Jim, when did you first see My Bloody Valentine?
Like again, it's one of these movies I was obsessed with watching as a kid because I couldn't get to watch it, and I probably watched it, in my early teens when my parents decided it was okay for me to watch this stuff. I mean, let's put it this way: I got to see A Clockwork Orange when I was 15, or 14 rather.
Wow.
So after that, the horse has left the barn.
Yeah, that's worse than
So
anything in My Bloody Valentine.
Right.
yeah, so and I love this movie in part because like Terror Train, it's terribly claustrophobic, right? But it's also weirdly incongruous. I think it might be the only slasher film I've ever seen with a country and western soundtrack. First of all, you
Hmm.
know, and the and it also it's I don't know how to describe it, but it's believable in that these people really do seem like a small town.
Yeah.
That the characters are believable, and what happens is believable. You can totally see some two idiots who are desperate to get to some party, just saying screw it and leaving people in the lurch, and the one survivor relying on cannibalism to make it through.
Right.
And the murders are also, they're pretty inventive. This film is sort of modest in its presentation, but it's extremely effective at the same time. I think my favorite scene, aside from the first, the opening scene, which I will not describe because I don't want to. It has to be seen to be enjoyed.
Yeah. I agree.
My favorite scene is when they're having the party at the union shop at the mine, and they're making boiled hot dogs, which first of all is a culinary crime. And
Yeah.
this guy grabs these tongs and he goes in to get a hot dog, and he pulls out what he doesn't know is a human heart.
Yeah.
It's boiling in there. It's all gray and nasty. He's like, "Oh, what the hell is this?" And he throws it back in and then grabs a hot dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't care, priorities.
Exactly.
Oh my
That
god.
and the guy's head in the refrigerator.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that they have the exact same character. I wonder, it's funny. There's the exact same character in this movie as there is in the first Friday the 13th. This sort of
Yes.
cracked old guy who tells the story about the legend,
Right.
and he ends up
Right.
getting murdered by the killer.
It's got a death curse. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
He
the
lives
bartender.
he lives
Yeah.
less longer than Crazy Ralph did.
Yeah, that's
I
It
true.
took
was
him
the one
until
that
Friday.
found Harry Warden.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Bill, what were you saying?
Go
Who?
ahead. Sorry, Bill.
Crazy Harry. He
Which
lived.
one of us?
You,
He
Bill.
lives longer
Oh.
than Barry. Than
My Bloody Valentine was one of those movies that got a lot of coverage in Fangoria.
Yes.
There was a lot of a lot of talk in that magazine. They ran a great feature about it that featured all these gory stills from the murders, and I was 11 years old, so this was big time stuff for me. I'm like, oh, nothing matters except the next issue of Famous Monsters and Fangoria,
Right.
and this was one of those hype films. But unfortunately, when the film was finished and submitted for a rating, the director had to take out a lot of that graphic violence because it was too far over the top for the MPAA. So a lot of the best stuff ended up on the cutting room floor, gag wise, for the gore stunts. All the good stuff ended up on the cutting room floor, and for a long time was believed lost. And we just thought we would never ever get a glimpse of these effects again. But fortunately, that wasn't true. Somebody had a video master, I think, of the gore effects. So there was a Blu-ray that came out years ago, and they've since done it a couple of times. Scream Factory was the last company to put it out uncut with the restored gore footage in it. It doesn't quite look. It doesn't match the rest of the film, but it doesn't really matter. Like, you won't care because it's really good stuff. There's one character that gets hung up on a shower and it comes out of her mouth.
Yeah.
yes,
You can see like the shower coming out of her mouth.
and then her boyfriend finds her like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's just kind of
Yeah.
like looking at it like, oh. But that was an interesting reversal, because in that case it was the guy who discovered the body and became a quivering pile of jelly and was like screaming and was crying.
Right. Now, that was a question I wanted to ask you guys, because I have a story about when I saw this in the drive-in, but I did rewatch it recently, and I do have actually I borrowed a Blu-ray from a friend of mine, and I did notice that when all of a sudden it got real graphic and you saw the gore, the film quality kind of changed. And I was going to ask you about that, and you just answered my question, Bill. So that was definitely added in. Um, but when I first saw it, my parents again took me to the drive-in, and they started the movie a little too early, so dusk hadn't quite settled in yet, and you couldn't see the film, and people started honking on their horns and they were angry, so they shut the film off and waited for it to get a little darker and then continued on, because of course you can't really rewind those films back then.
Yeah.
Flash forward, I'm not a huge remake fan. There's a handful, and some could be argued whether they're remakes or reimaginings of the original source material, like Carpenter's The Thing. But I went and saw the remake of this movie, My Bloody Valentine, only because Jensen Ackles from Supernatural, he plays Dean on Supernatural, was in it, and my buddy and I are huge Supernatural fans, so we went and saw it when it came out, and it was in 3D, which normally I don't like to pay for 3D in movies because I think they don't do it right, like House of Wax. So anyways, the movie starts and we're sitting there with our 3D glasses on, and I'm watching it. In the first 2 minutes, I'm like, something's not right here. Like, this movie is not in 3D. I take the glasses off, put them back on, and there's no difference. So I go up to get an usher, and I tell him that. Another usher comes up, and I give the first usher my glasses, and he puts them on, and he goes, "You're right." He's staring at the screen. He's like, "You're right. This film isn't in 3D." And he hands the glasses to his buddy, and they're like, "Oh shit." So they go running off. I take the glasses back and sit down with my buddy, and ultimately they stopped the film. I don't know what they did to fix it, but before they fixed it, the manager came in and gave us all free passes to the theater.
Oh, that's a fair trade-off.
It is, but
Yeah.
I just thought it was weird that the original and the remake, for me, when I saw them, both had an issue at the beginning of the film. I thought that was really insane.
It was an omen that you shouldn't be watching it.
I know.
The evil spirit
There's a-
of Valentine's Day.
But
yeah, some critical aspect of your soul has been taken away from you, and
Yeah.
you're going to have to do something terrible to get it back.
it's gone. It's gone. I'll just let it go. I don't care. No, but I watched this recently, like I said, and I was alone and I had the blanket. I was covering my face. I mean, it was terrifying to me. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought the pacing was good, the story was good, the acting wasn't half bad. I was pleasantly
What
surprised.
One of the scariest parts of it is something that I didn't realize the first, you know, there's a scene in it. There's a device that the killer uses to increase fear. He uses the pickaxe to knock out the lights as he comes
Yeah.
down the
Yes.
tunnel towards
Yep.
people, and that happens in Terror Train too, if you
Oh yeah,
recall.
good
Oh yeah.
point. Yeah.
And it re-emphasizes the claustrophobia of what's happening.
Right, right.
Yeah, My Bloody Valentine's very scary in my opinion. It's one of those movies that just you don't expect it to be much because it was, I mean, it came out in 1981,
Yeah.
which was early in 81, but still 1981, and there was a flood of slasher movies
Right.
on the market at that time, and they all got critically panned, some deservedly so, some not. But this was one of those ones that just kind of sneaks up on you. You don't expect it to be as effective as it ends up being, in my opinion. The setting is very creepy. Much of the movie takes place in a mine.
When the
Uh,
mayor opens up his box of candy and there's the heart in it, I mean, that's just, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
yeah,
And Jim, like you said, you believe these characters are small town characters or people. You know, it's like they really
Yeah.
sold it in this movie.
And then Mabel, who's like the most likable, lovable, like, everybody's grandmother character,
yeah.
gets it in her own laundromat.
She dies horribly in the
Oh
dryer.
yeah.
Yeah, and they open up the door, and her like roasted corpse dumps out. Oh my god!
So I just want to
It's
interrupt with a couple more comments here. Matt writes again on Facebook. Let's be honest, though, we've all had to turn to cannibalism during the holidays. Just me. And then from our conversation about the 3D of the film, he said maybe it was in 4D from a different timeline.
Yeah, they did some
my
interesting
reply.
things with that remake. They, in fact, the film has a twist ending, and they
Yes.
reversed the twist in
Yeah.
the remake.
Which is funny because I only had that twist in my mind when I was rewatching the original film, and it wasn't that. And I was actually pleasantly surprised
Mhm.
that they had done that. You know,
Tom Atkins in the remake.
I don't.
There's like a
Yes.
really great scene
Yes,
where he
I th-
gets killed.
yeah.
Because he was a guy in Halloween 3 and in The Fog.
Oh yeah, and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he
Night of
he
the
plays like a law
Creeps.
yeah.
enforcement guy or something. Yeah, Night of the Creeps. And he has this awesome death scene. I recall it was like they put him in there as a kind of fan service to horror fans, right?
Yeah.
It's like, guess who we've got? And then I think, doesn't his jaw get torn off by the pickaxe or something, and his tongue comes out, or I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, yeah, it's one of those. There's a gag just like it in the original, and they
Right.
recreated it with Tom Atkins, which I thought it's very sweet.
Yeah. It's sweet having his jaw ripped off. My son refers to him as Tom motherfucking Atkins because he's so awesome.
Yeah, enough said. My feelings exactly.
Yeah.
He's a
It's like
Pittsburgh guy.
Oh
it's like
really?
he's
Oh, I
the
didn't know that.
hero in the members only jacket.
That's awesome.
I've talked to Tom Atkins in the wild. I work in a theater, and I've talked to him a couple of times at the box office window. And there was one time he came to my window because he had gotten some tickets. He's like, "Can you move these seats? Like, we can't see the soloist from here." I said, "Oh, well, normally I wouldn't, Tom Atkins, but Halloween 3 is one of my favorite movies." And he laughed, and he did the ending line for me right there in the lobby. He's like, "Stop it, turn it off, stop it."
That's awesome.
A defining moment of my life, for sure.
That's awesome. And for those who get a chance to check this out on when I put it on our YouTube page, I do have an interview with Tom Atkins. It's real brief. I was as the character Uncle Death, and I was at the Horror Hound convention in 2011, and I got to talk to him briefly. Final thoughts on these two movies. Jim, happy. I'm sorry, not happy birthday to me. Terror
Other
Train and My Bloody Valentine, which we will cover that other one in the future.
I do want to make a quick comment about Happy Birthday to Me,
Okay.
which is every time Melissa Sue Anderson was in that, and she played Mary on Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Mary who goes blind and
Yeah.
then has her baby, and the blind school burns down because her adopted brother is smoking a cigar illicitly with one of his friends in the basement, and
Right.
so she has like this psychotic break, and she just keeps screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby!" after her adopted brother brings her a music box to try and ameliorate the situation.
Right.
And all I could think of is like, that psychotic break version character of Melissa Sue Anderson as the same character in Happy Birthday to Me. My baby, stab, stab, stab. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I really like Terror Train much. I'm sorry, I like My Bloody Valentine much better than Terror Train because it works better as a horror movie. But I think Terror Train as an artistic achievement is more compelling because the train and the setting and the uses of deception are really well done. But like I said, on a pure horror basis, on a rewatchability basis, I prefer My Bloody Valentine.
Right. Bill?
I wouldn't put one above the other because I love them both. It would be like asking somebody to choose between two of their children.
Sophie's Choice.
It's just they're so near and dear to me. But I think each one has their own unique qualities. My Bloody Valentine, if you see the uncut version, has the gore factor going for it. That's really the worst thing about Terror Train, and probably the reason that people don't talk about it like it's some kind of classic is because there really was no explicit violence in it. There was a decapitation, but not on screen.
Well, don't forget about the dismembered hand fondling.
The hand, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I thought that was a little tame. There's a lot of worse things in My Bloody Valentine, and in almost every other movie. You mentioned Halloween 2 earlier, and there was a lot more explicit violence in Halloween 2 than there was in Terror Train. And of course, the Friday the 13th films were competition. So that's the bad thing about Terror Train. It would probably be hailed as a classic, especially with the thematic elements that it does, the characters. That would probably end up being the better movie. But people talk more fondly of My Bloody Valentine, I would say.
Yeah, I agree, and in my mind, I agree with both of your opinions in that they're kind of equal in terms of, for me, when they came out, when I saw them in the drive-in. Um, I think I think Terror Train also is kind of borrows from that Animal House sensibility that wasn't too far
Yeah,
before this.
true. 1978.
Yeah, so it kind of built on that, and sort of it's like, what if Animal House were a horror movie? Not
It's
as
not a
good.
horror movie.
Yeah.
Interestingly, National Lampoon's Class Reunion is sort of like a remake of Terror Train, and
Oh yeah.
it's a spoof of slasher films from National Lampoon.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my god. I highly recommend these,
circle.
and like Bill said, if you can watch the My Bloody Valentine uncut, it's so good and so scary. Now this actually makes me think of a movie that I didn't have on our list of topics today, but do you guys remember a comedy spoof called Student Bodies?
Yeah, that's a fave.
I haven't seen that in
Ah,
so long, but I vividly remember scenes from that. I think I
I think
saw that
I
on
saw it, but I
cable.
don't really remember it. It must have been like 30 some odd years ago when
I,
I saw it.
I just remember a couple of scenes, like it's the killer's point of view, and he's walking up the stairs and his gloves on his hand. He's putting his hand on the railing, and then he hits gum, and like his gloved hand gets all stuck in this gum, and like the
It
whole
keeps happening to him throughout the whole movie, and
yeah.
then at one point he goes, "I'm going to kill the guy with the gum."
Yeah. Oh my god, I gotta check that out
It
again.
sounds like a kind of blundering Seinfeld interpretation of a slasher movie.
Right, is that the one where the dead bodies were farting?
I don't know. I don't. It's been so long.
Student Bodies.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay,
It could be.
that's funny. But yeah, that's a good
It's
one.
the one with the horse head bookends.
That's right.
There's a shop teacher in it who gets a sexual satisfaction from making horse head bookends. He's clearly like orgasmic while he's making these bookends. And
He might have been the one that made the horse head for The Godfather.
He's like,
Maybe.
oh, horsehead bookends. He's like lecturing the class about how wonderful horsehead bookends are. Of course, someone gets murdered with one.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. So, did you guys have anything else you want to say about these two movies?
I have a lot more I could say, but I think we should probably move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next up on our list of topics, yeah, I suppose we are what, an hour and 45 into this. We want to kind of briefly touch upon the old time radio drama called Suspense. Now this show had about 900 broadcasts. It had all kinds of, authors and directors on it. It's basically one of the most acclaimed old time radio shows that graced the airwaves from 1942 until 1962. So that's a long time. It was broadcast by the CBS radio network in the early 40s, and it featured a lot of Hollywood stars. You had people like Cary Grant and Humphrey Bogart, Orson Welles, Marlene Dietrich, just to name a few. And a guy named William Spear developed the show, which he considered to be a human drama. And it attracted, as I mentioned, the finest of Hollywood's elite, as well as the cream of the crop of the great actors. Orson Welles was in a lot of episodes. Cary Grant was quoted in 1943 as saying, "If I ever do any more radio work, I want it on Suspense, where I can get a good chance to act." So, and this guy Spear, he had this method of um, keeping them unrehearsed. So, the stars that were in the show, so they were a little uneasy going into that, and he wanted that. He wanted the uneasiness to show through in their radio performance. And it was sponsored by the Roma Wine Company, and it just made for a great old time radio experience. And if you guys get a chance, I mean, I listen to podcasts on Stitcher, and I found it on there when Jim you brought up the topic that we should talk about this show, and I knew I had heard it, but I didn't remember a lot of them, so I went and listened to a bunch. And there's a show on the podcasting apps. I don't know if it's on any other ones, but at least on Stitcher, I found it. And it plays Suspense. You get this guy comes on, tells you what you're about to hear, and then you listen to the
Well,
show.
all
And
the episodes are available at archive.org.
oh, okay. Oh, there you go. That's good too. So it's just an amazing show. Jim, you wanted to talk about this. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, most of my favorite episodes were written by one person, Lucille Fletcher, who is an acclaimed American 20th century playwright. And her most famous play is Sorry, Wrong Number, which started out as a suspense play, and it was so beloved that they kept replaying it, right? They kept restaging it because it was just, it was, everybody loved it. It's very powerful. And it was eventually turned into a movie, I think, with Barbara Stanwyck later in the 40s. But the ones I suggested, the other one that's really famous she wrote is the Hitchhiker that Orson Welles performed.
Oh yeah.
And it's about a guy who's Route 66 across the country, and he keeps saying the same guy who's a hitchhiker again and again, like a doppelganger or something. And I don't want to give away the story, but it's Lucille Fletcher is a master of creating psychological terror with an interior voice or with one person, and uses the experience of one person, first person narrative or first person experience, to just to sort of completely warp your sensibilities. And there is this my favorite Lucille Fletcher play. It's either, and we listed them in the I think in the notes. It's either a fugue in C minor with Vincent Price and Ida Lupino, or The Diary of Sophronia Winters. And the names of the actor and actress in that escape me. But in each case, you have a woman who has sort of fallen for this apparently wealthy, sophisticated gentleman. And what that gentleman turns out to be utterly insane and murderous. And gradually the curtain falls away. And Fletcher is very good at capturing the sense of a woman who trusts her emotions and then finds herself betrayed by her own instincts. And at least in The Diary of Sophronia Winters, it's less so maybe in a fugue in C minor, but it's that is what makes it so powerful, because it's, it's, well, okay, we'll do this. Self-confidence becomes self-realization, becomes transfixing horror. Um, what's really powerful about Sorry Wrong Number is that it's essentially a one-person play, and Agnes Moorehead, who's brilliant, she was in a lot of stuff. People may remember her as Esmeralda, the mother of
Samantha
the in
in
Bewitched,
Bewitched. Yeah.
but she's this invalid who is trying to reach her husband at work late at night, and she accidentally listens in on a conversation in which two men are plotting to murder a woman. And it turns out at the end that she's the woman they're plotting to murder. But she doesn't know this, and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. But because she's an invalid, and she probably has, I don't know if it's OCD, but she has a psychological nervous disorder. She is increasingly impossible to deal with as a listener. It's like, oh my God. And what the real thing is that she is the protagonist and the antagonist, because you don't, you pity her, but she's so um over overbearing. She lacks manners. She's constantly in your face, me. She's suffering, but insufferable at the same time, that you begin to understand why someone would want to have her murdered, even as you're horrified by the idea that, oh my God, she's going to be murdered. And that ambiguity is at the heart of the thing. And the fact that you have misgivings about what happens to this character amplifies the horror of the experience, in my opinion.
Interesting. Bill, when I brought the topic up that we were going to talk about this, you mentioned you really liked it. What is your opinion on Suspense?
Well, Suspense was a little bit classier than the ones I was a fan of, which was more like Inner Sanctum. Inner Sanctum Mysteries, a CBS radio mystery theater. Both
Yep.
of those were produced by Hyman Brown, who was a very successful radio producer, and he directed a lot of that stuff too. The Hermit's Cave is another radio show. If you've never heard of that one, you should look that up, if only for the intros. This really creepy sounding character introduced those ones. Inner Sanctum was always sort of joking, like it was sort of like a Charles Adams kind of humor. But
that was a direct influence on Tales from the Crypt, the EC Comics. So who was that? The narrator. Yeah, the narrator was the prototype for the Crypt Keeper, the Vault Keeper, and the Old Witch in the EC Comics.
Yeah, he made these creepy comments, and later in the series, there was always a sponsor, who a corporation that would underwrite the series if they would have a commercial. This was like in the 30s and 40s. I think like 41 might have been when Inner Sanctum went on the air. I could be wrong about the date, but it was very early 40s. And there would only be one sponsor, and the people on the program would talk about the product live usually. So Inner Sanctum had to work this other character in there. Her name was Mary, and she was solely there to talk about Lipton tea and Lipton soup. And Mary was scarier than the host, because Mary was obsessed with Lipton tea. She could take any comment that she made and turn it around to be about Lipton tea, to the point where you'd be like, what is wrong with this woman? Like she can't think about it. Nothing reaches her except
and she's totally
Lipton.
unflappable in the face of this really creepy dude, because she keeps talking about the tea.
She would just immediately, that was the first thing she would go to, was Lipton tea.
No, you're right. I never thought about that way. That's absolutely right. She's scarier than the actual horror host of the horror show.
He's pretending, but she's not. At least that's what.
That's hilarious. That is.
There was
so
a
funny.
similar but less effective used in The Strange Doctor Weird, which later I think became The Whistler. And The Strange Doctor Weird was sponsored by Adam Hatz, and the guy who lived in the house by the cemetery, the Strange Doctor Weird, would have an interplay with this normal sounding dude who was selling Adam Hatz, right? And so there was a conflict between the weird and the mundane, and the eager mundane, oh, buy these hats. But you're right. Mary was a much more compelling, creepy character than the guy who was hawking at hats.
Jim, you touched on this earlier about how radio sort of forces you to use your imagination, which is, arguably more effective than seeing something visualized for you. And that was, of course, the strength of these programs. That radio as a medium in itself, as an entertainment medium, that was a ritual. It was as ritualistic as television programs. Your favorite radio show was on, and you would gather around the radio and listen to this, and these images would come into your head that were obviously going to be scarier because you invented them. You were just visualizing whatever frightened you the most,
Right.
without someone guessing at what frightened you. So that was very effective, and that's why I love these radio dramas.
There was a Canadian broadcasting company series that was on for 2 or 3 years in the early 80s called Nightfall. And some of them are a lot of these episodes are genuinely terrifying.
Yeah.
And I remember there's one called I think it's The Book of Hell. And it's a book that this publisher comes into possession of, and it's written by some dodgy author. They try to find out who he is, they can't, but it's supposed to be a first person account of what hell is like. And one of the most compelling parts of it is that hell is personalized to you. So hell conforms to whatever most frightens you, and it's afflicted upon you repeatedly in perpetuity. So you are the author of your own hell. And I think that the guy who wrote that realized what we're talking about, the idea that a really scary radio play has a subjective component, which makes it even scarier because it approaches each listener according to what scares them.
What year was that?
1980. Also on archive.org, all these Nightfall episodes.
There was some that actually later than Nightfall. There was one called the Cape Cod Radio Mystery.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Caller on line 1.
Caller on line. Oh my God, I love that one. The other one was the one where it was the same person who was the caller on line 1 who sounded like a demented Michael Jackson. The second time we brought him up on this program, but he was a serial killer that was making audio recordings of his murders, and he would go into people's basements and wait for them to come home and murder them in their homes. So people were still doing it into the 80s. I actually used to listen to the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, hosted by E.G. Marshall.
That's right. Yeah.
On an AM radio. And I just found it one night, scanning the dials, and there it was, actually happening live while I was listening. They were all canned at that point, repeats.
Right.
Still, it was accessible to me even in the early 80s.
Yeah.
By the way, it recently occurred to me, and I may be wrong about this, but Hyman Brown is a stage name. That's not the creator's real name. I can't remember his real name, but it occurred to me one night. I was thinking about it. It's like Hyman Brown. What could that be?
I didn't even think of that till you said it.
I think that was his real name, Hyman Brown.
No. It's not his real name. His real name is something Eastern European. I can't remember what it is, but I was saying he's a brilliant guy, and so I'm sitting here thinking, Hyman Brown, that's an unusual name, and it's like that's why he picked it.
His Ukrainian, Hyman Brown.
Yeah, his original name was hold on, I just had it here. Ishmael Hyman. No, wait, that's a football guy. Never mind. I was wrong. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure he managed to work I don't even want to use the term because I don't want to. Well, let's put it this way. I don't want to ruin it. If you think about it long enough, you'll get the joke.
Yeah.
And I think he intended that to be a joke. And it's one of those things where, it's so deep and subversive that it flies over the heads of most people. And then only later do they realize, when their innocence has been stripped away, what's been going on, like Leave It to Beaver, Beaver Cleaver. Think about that name.
Ward, you were a little hard on the beaver last night. Oh my God! All right,
This show
so
has gone downhill rapidly.
yeah, before we go
I take
completely
full
into the sewer.
responsibility for that.
No problem. No, this has been awesome. This has been so good. I definitely recommend the folks at home, if you're watching or listening, check out Suspense wherever you can get it. Archive.org was mentioned. Also, I think it's on podcasts. So and any old time radios. I mean, Bill and I talked about it off mic, and I used to love X minus one. I used to listen to that as a kid. I think I found that on an AM station myself. So many good ones. I have a bunch of audio cassettes of uh, Sherlock Holmes and just a bunch of stories, and they're not all horror and suspense. If you're a little
No.
skittish about horror, there's comedies and dramas, and in fact even
Westerns.
westerns. Even a few soap operas started off as radio shows and
They even
ended up
have
becoming on
crime
TV.
government propaganda ones, like I Was a Communist for the FBI,
Right.
and Jack Webb's Dragnet started out on the radio. I think.
Yes, it did. It started as a radio show.
A lot of this stuff is available on YouTube, so you could just go listen to it right now. You don't even have to look very far for it.
Right, right, exactly. So, as we wrap up here, we had one last topic that Jim, when you and I were saying what topics you wanted to talk about, you mentioned, and I'd never heard of it, Bill. I know I mentioned it to you, but I don't know if you've heard of it. It's something called pinky violence. So, Jim, do you want to tell us what that's all about?
Well, Pinky Violence was sort of the Japanese grindsploitation, and I watched a bunch of these years ago. I was like eating them like popcorn because they were so compelling. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, they had a direct influence on Quentin Tarantino. And they're hyper violent, hyper stylized exploitation movies made in Japan. One of them is about a female prisoner um, who is submitted to all these terrible crimes by the government, corrupt government agents, and she leads, at least in the one I saw, she lead prisoner. What is it? Prisoner 767 or Prisoner 9. I don't even think she has a name, and she leads a revolt against her oppressors, and usually they're very male. So there are lots of beautiful women scantily clad or naked, and they're swinging samurai swords and vanquishing their enemies, and or they're like tied up in some kind of heroin distribution ring. It's like the 70s exploitation phenomenon, but it's made in Japan.
Somebody wrote
And
about a pinky violence genre film called Stray Cat Rock in Drive-In Asylum. I don't remember who the contributor was. I think it was Joseph Perry. But yeah, I mean, I only know about it casually as a genre. I haven't seen it.
no, it's I only got to watch it because when I watched it when Netflix was still sending you DVDs in the mail,
Oh wow.
because that it wasn't streaming. That's how I had to watch
I mean, they
it.
don't
And
anymore.
I don't know, do they? I mean, what's a DVD anyway? I don't even know what it stands for anymore.
Oh, I still buy them. I have them.
Physical media? What is that? What are you, like, living in the Stone Age?
Hey, I got
Anyway.
vinyl records up the wazoo. So
Me too.
But what they're very the female prisoner, the one I remember seeing, I think it was the first or the second in the they're quite popular in the series, and it's very stylized. I mean, it's got very sort of almost psychedelic elements to it, but it's not simply a kind of a grindhouse exploitation film. It has, I don't want to say pretensions because that makes it sound like it's tawdry and failing. It has really compelling artistic components to it, and it focuses on women's suffering and revenge at the hands of male depredation and almost nonsensical violence. Not nonsensical, but men who are threatened by strong women do terrible things to them and then have terrible things done to them in return. And they're just they're very, very well executed, and the cinematography is amazing, and the storytelling is very simple, but at the same time very compelling, and you can see the characters are believable. It's what it reminds me of a little bit is the 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 TV series that was on Netflix about the women in prison, Orange is the New Black.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's sort of like a precursor to that in some ways. I mean, obviously it's a grindsploitation film and it's got lots of action and murder, but at the same time, the sort of the humanization of female prisoners. Some of whom are not glamour pusses, not beautiful women who, are the subjects immediately of male fantasy, which is what a lot of the women in prison films were in the West. It's sort of it's anticipating that series, which was highly critically acclaimed.
So, are
So
Pinky Violence films, were they made in the 70s?
late 60s and early 70s, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was,
Okay.
I think the name of the studio was Toei, Toei.
Oh, Toei, yeah.
Yeah, and it still exists,
Oh,
if
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
They've done a lot of anime too. A lot of cartoons I grew up with back when they were just called Japanese cartoons, you know.
You mean like Gatchaman,
Yep.
Battle of the Planets?
I think they did
Did they
that
do
one.
Gatchaman?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think Force 5, a lot of those ones were done because that was a different show every day of the week, at least here in America, and those were done by
Right.
Toei.
Yeah, they had to dumb that stuff down for the American audience, like G.I. Joe. Remember, it was like
Oh,
no one ever died.
right.
Remember the Robotech controversy? It's like you're having a war scene where people actually die. You can't expose my children to that,
Yeah, yeah. They couldn't show a character get killed off until like episode 22 or something, and then they killed off Ben Cross, and one character does the sign of the cross when that happens, and I'm watching it as a kid, going, "Can they show this on TV?" you know?
Well, it reminds me of the opening sequence. I think it's the opening sequence in or near the beginning of the Transformers movie from 1986,
Yes.
where Megatron blasts his way into that Autobot shuttle and just wastes all these first generation Autobots,
Yeah.
including Jazz. And I'm
Yeah.
like, can I play with the Jazz toy anymore? I mean, he's dead now, right? And it's like all these people are dead. It's like, yeah, they're dead. It's like, wow.
You
Yeah.
were
That's
sticking
dark.
very close with canon, weren't you? Even in your fantasy life with the toys.
Yeah, I was a kid, right? This was my life. I had a life of the mind. I was a nerdy kid. So
That's it. Who wasn't, at least
I
among
think
us.
we're all guilty here. That's the whole reason we're doing this.
Right, exactly. Well, guys, this has been awesome. Thank you so much, of course, Jim, for being our guest this week and on episode
thank
3.
you.
Can you tell us tell us and our viewers where to find you and your books online?
My website is jamesharberson.com. And there are links to multiple retailers of my books on that site. And my books are available at Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, at Kobo. They're available at all kinds of booksellers all over the place. And I'm on Instagram at Novel Stay, and or no, Stay. I'm sorry, Stay Alive GN, and Instagram is at Novel Stay, and Twitter is Stay Alive GN. So, or you can just search James Harberson. I have an official Google identity profile now, and it sort of serves as a clearinghouse for all kinds of information about my writing.
Nice.
So, luckily, I don't think the bots that have crawled over every aspect of my life are contributing to that surreptitiously, but I can't be sure of that. So.
That's hilarious. Oh my god, so funny. And Bill, can you give us your contact info as well?
You can reach me. Well, you could visit driveinasylum.com. That's the hub for all of my social media contacts. On Facebook and Insta, I'm Groovy Doom. On Twitter as well. Those are like the 3 main platforms I stick to. My Facebook and my Insta are always active. Twitter, I can't get arrested, so I need all the Twitter love I can get. And weekly, I also have a weekly webcast that I do with my show partner Sam Panico. It's called the Drive-In Asylum Double Feature. We broadcast live usually every Saturday night, and it's on. I have a YouTube channel as well, Groovy Doom. Check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
Groovy Doom is super cool. I highly recommend it to people.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
it's
go ahead,
like if I ran like I had this idea. It's like if I were a psychotherapist, I'd want to leave Groovy Doom issues out in my waiting room and just see what happened.
Oh, you mean Drive-In Asylum? The fanzine
I'm
is
sorry,
called
that's
Drive-In
right.
Asylum.
Yeah, that's
Groovy
right.
Doom is
That's
the
right.
Facebook page. You
Right.
should leave Drive-In Asylum in your waiting room,
That's awesome.
It's like,
right
who is
next
this
to
guy?
Highlights magazine for the kids.
There you go. And Fangoria number 15, you know.
Roger, what about you? Where can we find you online?
Well, first I wanted to mention before I give out my contact info that next episode, episode 4, we're going to have not one but 2 guests. We're going to have Sam Panico, who, as Bill mentioned, is his co-host on the Drive-In Asylum double feature. And we're also going to have a guest who also co-stars on a podcast called the B Movie Cast named Juan Ortiz. And both of them are experts on Mexican horror and Mexican luchador horror films. And we're going to have a field day talking about all this stuff with the 2 experts. I myself have been catching up on them, and we're going to have some fun with that. So that's going to be a fun next episode. So we hope people tune in for that. But I can be found at havenpodcasts.com. And if you want to give your feedback on this show, you can email us at havenpodcasts@gmail.com. And I always try to enunciate that last S because it's plural, and my Boston accent makes it hard for me to
It's important.
pronounce
Yeah.
things. So, and if you want to be a guest on the show or discuss horror in depth with us, maybe you've got a particular topic you'd like to talk about, please PM us on the Facebook Fright Lounge page, or email us, as I said, at havenpodcasts@gmail.com. So join us again for the next episode of the Fright Lounge. And I'm going to screw this up.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then I'm just going to stop the share, stop the recording. Well, that was great, guys. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to tell you, besides Tubi, have you checked out Midnight Pulp?
No.
It's the streaming service Midnight Pulp. I actually have a subscription. They have all the Santo films.
Oh,
for
wow.
free.
Yeah, Tubi has a lot of them too, but not all of them.
Yeah. They also have like all of the Godzilla films or something. And
Nice.
it's basically weird cinema from around the globe. And it's uncut. And it's fantastic.
What's it called?
It's
Midnight
just
Pulp?
Midnight Pulp. And a lot of the content is free. Basically, if you're looking at softcore pornography, they charge you. But otherwise, if you're just looking at the weird films they have from all over the place, it's free with commercials. So, and it's uncut.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Midnight. Oh yeah, here we go. Midnight Pulp. I'm looking at the website right now. It looks like they actually broadcast on a schedule too.
Yes, they do. They have a channel. It's kind of like Roku.
Yeah.
Roku channel, all the live stuff on the streaming
Sorry,
channel.
guys.
That's no problem.
I thought I was gonna piss my pants before we
You
finished
know what?
that
All right, I'm
segment.
going to take a break while you guys talk. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay.
All right. You know what's also great is um did you see that documentary? What is it? Sadism on a thread about the Nazi exploitation film movement in the late
No.
60s and early 70s. That's on Tubi.
Yeah, that
And
sounds interesting.
it is insane. These
Yeah.
movies are insane. I mean, holy shit, insane. I you know, the 70s were a kind of magical time of no restraint artistically. So an attorney I used to work with said that Blood-Sucking Freaks, in his opinion, was made to test the boundaries of the First Amendment. So you've seen that, right?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I don't know. I didn't think it was all that bad personally.
Well, there's a scene in it that Bret Easton Ellis, I'm pretty sure, took for part of American Psycho. So
Where they put a
where
straw in the guy's head?
no, when he uses the disembodied head to give himself fellatio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is some dark shit.
I mean,
So
it is. I'm not saying it's not strong, but it's not realistically presented, shall we say. I think it's a little bit cartoonish, even. So I can distance myself from it. It's not like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer serious, you know.
yeah.
Plus, Joel Reed's films are like made for $10.
Yeah. But Tubi, and especially Tubi, but also Midnight Pulp, they have all these fantastic documentaries about schlocky films through the 20th century.
Okay.
You know, the exploitation films, all of the films, the sex educational films they made to get around the censor rules. It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, you can show people having sex if it's educational.
Or
They even have
giving birth.
Mom and Dad, you know, those roadshow things that Kroger Bab took on.
Yeah.
The most
He made a
messed
ton
up
of money.
one is about, there's this film about the people in Ohio who made all those traffic fatality driver education films.
Yep.
And they got into, there was a scandal because I guess that the people making them were either it was surreptitious or they're working with the Columbus, Ohio. I think it was Columbus, Ohio Police Department. There was a public men's room in downtown that was a site for gay men to have sex, and they started surreptitiously filming the people in there. It was a
Yeah.
real scandal, you know.
Then they actually took the footage and like outed these guys to their families and ruined
Yeah.
all their lives.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was fucking horrifying.
Wow.
And these people were presenting themselves as, you know, moral crusaders for safer driving, and at the same time they were exploiting people terribly. You know, it's all happening in Ohio too. It's such a weird agglomeration of facts.
Wow.
But I'm pretty sure this is available for free on Tubi.
Oh my
So
God. I'll have to
the
check that
$2
out.
billion dumpster fire that actually has redeemed itself, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Tubi.
Yeah, because Tubi was designed to be this, you know, streaming site for short films and all this other stuff, and then the pandemic hit, and the people behind it, including I think the former CEO of eBay and Jeff Katzenberg and all these other Hollywood luminaries, took this bath. You know, it was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
It was like CNN Plus level disaster, except more expensive.
That's interesting because I thought they were doing well right now because first of all, I love Tubi. You know, I think Bill might have introduced me to Tubi, and you know, it's great because they have when I had COVID a couple months ago, all I did was watch an obscure 70s horror film on Tubi and then sleep for 2 hours and then wake up and watch another Tubi film. But we introduced a bunch of people, the cast and crew from a film called The Last Possession that was just made this past year. And they
Yeah, that's a
right
good
out the
movie.
gate, it's very good. And they got a deal on Tubi, and that's where they're broadcast, you know, where they premiered from. So I think it's become
Well,
a good platform.
it's become something great, but it was originally intended, I think, to be much more mainstream.
Hmm.
So they had the idea that, you know, millennials, Gen Z, they all love to watch short videos on their phones, and I think it was designed to provide original content that way.
Oh, interesting.
But partially because of the pandemic, and partially maybe because it was an idea ahead of its time, it flopped. So, but it's a good idea. It's just, I remember reading this book once. What was it? It was about Wall Street, and there is a phenomenon on Wall Street where Amazon did this. Basically, it's a great idea, and but it's going to take too long to scale it, to get people doing it, to get to the success that obviously it promises. So what you do is you find somebody to invest in it who will keep you solvent until it has sufficient momentum to be profitable. And that's what Tubi, in my opinion, is. It's something that was way ahead of its time. Kind of like Amazon has almost never turned a profit, but all of its investors keep it in the black, and so it's able to eat up all of its rivals because it has a never-ending source of fresh capital.
You know what's interesting? And Bill, tell me if you see this, but Jim, when I look at your face right now, your eyes, they look like they're silver. Like you look like Vin Diesel from Pitch Black.
Well, it's
Or
two
that
things. It's
second
the
episode
lighting,
of Star
but
Trek.
I'm very nearsighted, like more or less without my glasses. I'm legally blind.
Oh, wow.
And so I have really thick lenses, and they obscure my face. And I put them on only because I got up at 4:30 this morning. I had my contacts in for like 16 hours or something, and I just, I couldn't read anything with them in.
Right,
So,
right, yeah. The strange thing is I wear contacts for distance, and now I have to wear readers while I'm wearing my contact lenses. It's like, what?
yeah, this optometrist informed me years ago that after you hit the age of 40, your eyesight just gradually starts to fade.
Oh my God. How am I going to
Not
watch all
like
these
you're going
movies?
blind, but your ability to read tiny text,
Right.
subsides.
Well, I couldn't read that cigar label earlier.
Oh, yeah. I thought of that. I mean, I have these glasses. I just wear them because I know they make me look old, but I like to be able to see because I can see distance. So I like to look over them. But then if I'm reading or looking at my food or something, I can wear them. But we need to wrap this up real quick. But guys,
Okay.
so I know Bill, were you super familiar with Pinky Violence? I forget what your answer was when we asked.
No, I know what it is as a genre, but I haven't seen any.
So do you want to plan something where, independently you and I watch some of these films and then maybe a few months down the road we have Jim back on and we talk about them?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, they're great. You might have to buy some of them because they're not outside of the stuff I've seen on streaming. Some of the best films are not necessarily available on streaming. You'd have to buy the DVD. But, which sort of surprises me because, they're so good. And there's at least one, I guess, fairly prominent book about them. So it's, I don't know. I mean, I think that people think of Japanese cinema and they think of like, they don't realize that Pinky Violence is the forerunner of like Tokyo Gore Police.
Oh, okay.
Somebody said, who was it? Like a friend of mine observed that the Japanese are not afraid to go there.
Yeah.
Like there are two, in terms of the arts, there are two populations that I know of on Earth that are not afraid to go there: the Germans and the Japanese.
Yeah.
So
Who was that? Jorg Buttergeit's Necromantic? That's a pretty horrible film. I mean, horrifying.
Oh my God, that's so disturbing. Where she takes the eyeball into her mouth.
Yeah.
Unforgettable moment in cinematic history.
Exactly. So yeah, I'll look into it too, and I'll see if I can find some of these. I know I have buddies that have tons of films, so I might be able to get digital copies of them as well. So Bill, I'll share them with you and Jim as well, and we'll go from there.
I'll buy the book and read it, and I'll send it to you guys when I'm done if you want.
Cool.
I've been wanting to read that book anyway.
Awesome. That'd be great, man.
All right.
Just add it. But all right, guys, I gotta run. I gotta be up early tomorrow. So good talking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Nice to see you guys.
Awesome. You too.
Sure.
I really appreciate you guys.
All right.
Truly.
Same here, man. Same
Thanks.
here. All right,
All right.
take care.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Oh my God. How you doing, honey? Why is that floodlight on? Ready for some General Hospital?
Sure.
Ow!
Oh.
Oh my God, I'm so tired. Yeah, you get your bottle of wine with you?
Yeah, I drank it.
You drank it all?
Yeah.
Oh, goody. Well, I'm gonna have some of this. Okay. He was a good boy. We played video games.
Yeah.
And then he was like, I give him toast for dinner. Toast and raspberries. And I said, all right, I'm just kidding. I don't want it, baby. I don't want it. No, I didn't say that. I was going to put it on a napkin. And he's like, I don't want it on a napkin. I want it on a plate. I'm like, okay. And I grabbed the plate out of the sink that was clean. And I brought it over to him. I said, and when you're done eating off this plate, you can wash it in the sink since you insisted on dirtying it. He said it was in. And then I was in the kitchen and I thought better of it. And I'm like, oh, I'll just give him a fucking paper plate. So I give him a paper plate. And he goes, so I don't have to wash it?
That's funny. He's a good boy. Alright, let me get my snack because I couldn't get any of my snacks because you were in the middle of your
Did you
life.
eat burger?
Yeah, and I just like took it in 2 bites.
Oh, good. That was
And I
a
took
hearty
this-
dinner. I know, my God. It was
Well, it was only that much.
Oh, you're so tipsy. I love it.
Burp. Burpee.
Because you don't have to work tomorrow.
I know. I'm like, I know.
Oh, wait. Why is there no general hospital?
Huh?
Why is there no general hospital? Was there a general hospital today?
I would think so.
Oh, wait. Today's Sunday, not Monday.
Oh. So no, there's no general hospital today. Oh, we're gonna finish our movie.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna do.
Oh, want to see my girly butt?
Thank you. That was so lovely.
Wasn't it?
That was fabulous.
It was beautiful. Oh, yeah. So fucking sales lady from work texts me in the middle of the show.
Oh God.
And it's like, oh, she called me, and then oh, I'm in the middle of a live stream online, and then she's like, oh, well, they changed the configuration of the ballroom around. Now we spent fucking 8 o'clock till 2 o'clock to get the ballroom set up.
Yeah.
And now it's all changed, and so when I go in tomorrow, I'm gonna have to move shit around. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Stupid assholes.
So you know what? Whatever. I'll go in.
Oh, here's the big hunk of cheese. I was gonna.
Yeah, but where's the half a hunk of cheese that I took out of the freezer?
I don't know.
I couldn't find it. It was in the fridge.
I don't know. I didn't wait till I see
Because
it.
remember the other day you said, "Oh, I have to grate that cheese."
I was talking about this big hunk.
Yeah, but there was a half a hunk that I took out of the freezer
Well,
quite
I
a while ago.
saw a half a hunk right here. Is that the same half a hunk?
Maybe it is.
I'm just gonna do sour cream so I don't gross you out with the
Because you're a
salsa.
sauerkraut.
No, because I like salsa, but you don't. So
I don't care what you eat.
I know. I just don't feel like
Makes my
roasting
eyes
you.
water.
Right, exactly. I don't feel like this.
Oh, I can smell something nasty right now.
Just cheese. Cheese isn't that bad. Is cheese bad?
No, it's those crackers.
Oh.
I can't stand them.
Oh.
They're like Fritos. I hate Fritos. I always hated Fritos.
Alright, fine. I'll put salsa on it because you're already fucking complaining anyway.
Oh, stop it. You're not putting salsa.
Well, then shut the fuck up.
Fuck. Shut up.
I told you to shut up. You have to complain about every little thing. I do.
Only if it's Mexican, unless it's a Mexican wrestling movie. I thought I shut this off. Oh. Is it still doing its thing? Oh, it's done. Interesting. Okay.
Alright, I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
Hooky dokies.